y'all, it's Amanda. It has been a while since I've posted a video. I'm recording this on Sunday because tomorrow there is a hearing on the Adnan Syed case. And this has been a case that I have followed for years. And I feel like this is the first time that he is as close as he is to being released. So for those of you who are not familiar, I just want to do a quick video. If you want me to do an actual video on his case, I will. It'll take a while because if you're familiar, you know that this case has twists and turns everywhere. But we're just gonna today go over it really briefly. And if my background is messing up, I'm sorry. I've been having problems with it. So bear with me, I promise it'll get better. To start this case, we will start where I guess everyone found out about the case, and that was in the podcast Serial. Serial was a 12-episode podcast that went through the case. The person doing the investigation was kind of on the fence of guilt or innocence, so it kind of ended leaving the viewer the opportunity to make their own decision. And if I remember correctly, the person doing the podcast didn't say whether she thought he was innocent or guilty at the end. It's been a long time since I've listened to it because Serial came out in 2014. But Rabia, who is Adnan's family member, she's now an attorney, and she and two other attorneys actually got together and kind of piggybacked off of Serial and made the podcast Undisclosed. It takes what Serial gave you and just gives you so much more. Oh my gosh, it was like the best podcast. So if you haven't listened to Undisclosed and you have listened to Serial, I highly recommend it. And then to take things even further, Bob Ruff ended up doing a whole Adnan series on Truth and Justice podcast. And he kind of took Serial and Undisclosed and like really dug deep into his own investigation. And it was really interesting and it really makes you think. So if you haven't listened to that podcast, I would say go ahead, because it is very, very good. And I think that changed who I thought committed this crime. We will get into the actual story of what happened now. In 1999, 17-year-old Adnan Syed was arrested and charged with the murder of his ex-girlfriend. This past week, prosecutors filed a motion to vacate his conviction. This motion basically says the state no longer has confidence in the integrity of the investigation, and for that reason, his conviction should be overturned. So the victim in this case is 19-year-old Hae Min Lee. She was a senior at Woodland High School in Baltimore County, Maryland. Hae would disappear after leaving school one afternoon, and a month later, her body would be discovered, and her cause of death was strangulation.
I played field hockey for 2 years. I've played lacrosse for 3 years, and I also managed boys wrestling.
That's a lot to do. Do you have time to have a job while you're doing this?
Yeah, I try to manage my schoolwork and my after-school work.
Investigators say her body was partially buried approximately 100 yards off the roadway. Police are investigating this case as a homicide.
The police investigation ultimately led them to Adnan Syed, who was the ex-boyfriend of Hae Min Lee at the time of her disappearance, despite the fact that their star witness, Jay Wilds, was basically being fed information by the police, because at the time I believe Jay was 19 or 20, somewhere around that age, and he was facing drug charges. It's suspected that the police used him kind of like an informant. They fed him information, and that's how they got their conviction. Adnan's trial would begin the next year in 2000, and Jay during trial would actually implicate himself in this murder. He said that he helped Adnan bury Hae's body, but there's a whole lot of information out there that totally discredits all of his stories. The prosecution presented cell phone tower records that supposedly put Adnan near the place where her body was found, although now those cell phone records have been proven to be inconsistent with the way that they work, as in they were using incoming calls versus outgoing calls, and it's totally different how those work as far as pinging phones, because you have have to remember, this was back in the late 90s. Cell phones were not as high-tech as they are today. A jury would find 17-year-old Adnan Syed guilty of murder, robbery, kidnapping, wrongful imprisonment, and he was sentenced to life in prison. 14 years after he was sentenced, the podcast Serial raised doubts about certain facts in the case. The podcast actually revealed that there was another student named Asia McClain saw Adnan in the library at the time that Hae was supposedly murdered, and she would have been an alibi witness for him. However, Adnan's defense attorney at the time, Christina Gutierrez, never followed up with Asia McClain on this alibi. This would be an individual other than Adnan that could say, hey, you know, he wasn't committing this murder at this time because he was in the library at school.
I was sitting in the library bored to tears, and someone walked in that I knew. I asked him about his breakup with Hae. She was dating someone else, but that he just wanted her to be happy. He didn't seem to be disturbed or angry with her. The biggest thing to us was setting a good example for our children, leaving a legacy of integrity.
His defense attorney at the time of trial, Christina Gutierrez, was actually disbarred in 2001 because she had a history of complaints come forward, and it's clear if you look back at the trial that she did not present a good defense for Adnan. In February 2015, a Maryland court agreed to hear an appeal from Adnan's now attorney. A judge ended up granting him a new hearing so that additional evidence could be presented to the jury, such as the alibi that Asia McClain was corroborating in this case. His defense team also took this hearing as an opportunity to let the judge know that Adnan's former defense attorney had been negligent, and she in no way questioned the prosecutor's cell phone records, even though it would have been fairly easy for her to debunk had she been performing her job correctly. As you can imagine, Hae's family was not very happy that Adnan was getting a new trial. They felt like justice was served when Adnan went to prison for life, and as a victim's family, I can completely understand feeling that way. At this hearing, his lawyers asked for him to be released on bail, but essentially that request was denied. In 2018, the Maryland Court of Special Appeals actually agreed with his attorneys that he had ineffective assistance of counsel, and they upheld the decision to grant Adnan a new trial. In a vote of 4-3, the Maryland Court of Appeals actually reversed the decision to give Adnan a new trial. They said that even though his attorney was deficient during his trial, it didn't prejudice him enough to warrant giving him a new trial. And that decision ultimately reinstated his conviction. In November of that year, the U.S. Supreme Court actually denied hearing his case altogether. And that brings us to March of this year. Back in March, the prosecutors finally agreed to do DNA testing on certain evidence that was found in relation to Hae's murder, and that was based on a Maryland law that allows prosecutors to modify sentences if the individual was under the age of 18 at the time and has served at least 20 years in prison. The DNA test results, unfortunately, were not what everyone wanted. While Adnan and Jay's DNA was nowhere in these test results, a lot of the results came back inconclusive because the DNA was so old or there wasn't enough DNA on the object to test. So in a way, it helped to prove that Adnan's DNA wasn't there on the items that they were able to get DNA from, but at the same time, it didn't really help because so much of it was inconclusive. But last week, in a crazy turn of events, prosecution actually filed a motion to vacate his conviction, which doesn't happen very often. That essentially is the state asking a judge to throw out this individual's conviction and give them a new trial However, the way the motion reads, the prosecutors that are there now just completely rip apart the original prosecutor's timeline of events. So if his sentence is overturned tomorrow, he will most likely never have to endure another trial, thankfully. I'm just going to briefly go through the new information that came from the motion. Shockingly, the prosecution stated at the beginning of the motion that they have been reinvestigating this crime for the past year, and that was not known to pretty much anybody. No one knew they were reinvestigating, and the fact that they finally are after all these years is just what everybody who's been following the story has been hoping would happen. And they also state that they've received new information that calls into question the conviction of Adnan and the facts surrounding it. And they also specify that on the items they were able to pull DNA from, there was an unknown female DNA because they only tested it against Hae, Adnan, and Jay. So there was an unknown female profile. We don't know who that female was or if it's related to the case in any way. But the good news is the prosecution is currently reviewing the rest of the evidence. There's some evidence that wasn't tested during this original DNA test. So hopefully they can take the evidence that they have left, test that, and, figure out who did this. And that leads me to the best news in this entire motion. Are you ready? There is not one, but two alternate suspects in this case. Not only are there two alternate suspects, but both suspects were known to the prosecution at the time of Adnan's trial, and it was never disclosed to the defense. That's right, they had two alternate suspects in their file during trial that they never told anyone about. Ridiculous. What they also shared about one of these two suspects is that one of them had a motive to kill Hae. And one of them actually threatened to kill her in the presence of another individual. These people are not named, but they said with the other individual present that they would make her disappear and they would kill her. Two suspects, one with an actual motive. Adnan had no motive. He and Hae got along great. They were still friends. They did not have a bad breakup. And they had the same friends. I mean, they still hung around together. Adnan had absolutely zero motive to commit this murder. So now I'm wondering what the motive to kill Hae could have been based on the alternate suspect. And who were they with when they said that they would kill her? The bigger question is, since 1999, there has been multiple prosecutors that have seen this file. They have seen that this information was in there, and none of them did anything about it. None of them. So I applaud the prosecutors in Baltimore that actually brought this to the court's attention, because they didn't have to. This information has been hidden for so long. And it's sad because this is someone's life. This is not a game. This is serious. Susan Simpson on Undisclosed actually got a copy of the state's file when they started the podcast so she could review. She said that she knew more people were aware that the prosecution failed to make this information known because everything related to those two alternate suspects were missing from the state's file. And this is a textbook Brady violation. You'll hear a lot in wrongful conviction cases. Most of them have a Brady violation. And basically what that means is that the prosecution has evidence that would be beneficial to the defendant and could change the outcome of the jury's decision, but the prosecution intentionally withholds this information from the defense in order to get a conviction. It's sad, but it really happens often. And a Brady violation alone is 100% eligibility for a new trial in any case. So we have one suspect with a motive. What information did they give us about the second suspect? Let me tell you, because this is interesting. The second suspect had been convicted of in the past, and they were arrested for attacking a woman in her car. Now, if you remember, Hae was in her car the last time she was seen. So, not only is that suspicious, there's more. The motion states that one of the two suspects has family that actually lives in one of the homes that is in front of the grassy area where Hae's car was found. I won't name names, but if you follow this case, there's one individual that is very familiar with not only the site where her body was found, but also the site where the car was found, and it's not Adnan. Another interesting fact is one of these two suspects was giving not one, but two polygraph tests. One was passed and one was failed. If you follow this case, there's only one individual in this entire case who has had two polygraph tests. So you put that together. I'm not going to say any names on here for legal reasons. It's not Adnan. The rest of the motion pretty much lays out how certain evidence was used in the trial to convict Adnan and how this evidence was presented in a false light, which has been questioned for many years in this case. And I thought it was interesting. They asked for, at minimum, a new trial, but they also asked him to be released without bail. Do you think they would agree to release anybody without bail if they thought that it was a possibility that they had committed this crime? Adnan is now 41 years old, and the motion on his hearing is tomorrow, which I'm not posting this video till tomorrow, so his hearing on this motion is today. Cross your fingers. I hope and I pray that they end up throwing his conviction out, because the whole case was crap. But his attorneys have said that he could actually walk out a free man on Monday. On that note, I will keep you updated. I'll post a short update of what happens at the hearing on Monday. I will see you guys tomorrow.